The most significant event in Waylon Jennings' life occurred before he ever recorded a single piece of country music. Working together, Waylon Jennings and Jessi Colter did more than simply break the rules. They altered the course of an entire generation of country music performers. However, behind her music and popularity, Jessi Coulter had secrets that no one truly knew. She survived the turmoil of outlaw country and the pressure of being the silent motivator for a man who nearly committed suicide. However, there was more to the story when Waylon attempted to abandon his most significant personal battle in the desert. Why did Jessi disappear after the death of his father? When it was silent, what did she discover? The reality is difficult to comprehend and distressing. Take off while simultaneously addressing an identity issue. She didn't intend to turn to crime. Before she changed her name to Jessi Coulter, Miriam Johnson spent a significant portion of her early years abiding by the rules. She was raised in a Pentecostal home in Phoenix, Arizona, where she participated in the silent labor of faith while listening to sermons and music. But beneath the surface, something else was happening, and she was being drawn in an unknown path by a creative force. Miriam was born into a devout Pentecostal family in 1943. Her early years were characterized by order, self-control, and a strong commitment to religion. Her mother was a pianist and a preacher in addition to being a devoted Christian. The house was always filled with Bible studies, gospel music, and a strong feeling of right and evil. However, Miriam was beginning to consider that there were too many restrictions in the world in which she was raised. The gap between what she felt and what she had been taught to believe was widening. She believed in God. She appreciated her upbringing. However, she was also aware of her deeper, more complex musical tastes, which were out of place at church. Even as a young woman, she asked herself silent questions that shaped her worldview and the profound spirituality of her songs. Her younger brother Paul's death in a horrific accident was one of the worst things that happened to her in her early years. There was a break, not just a loss. Miriam's faith was completely upended by Paul's death, and she will always have a terrible psychological scar. Years later, she stated in interviews that his passing altered her perspective on the world and her relationship with God. It produced a spiritual ambiguity that makes religion harder to explain but does not eliminate it. Her lyrics, melodies, and the general tone of her music would eventually reflect the decades-long stress she carried with her. As she grew older, Miriam Johnson came to the realization that her path would not be in the church. It would be in a different location. She had always played the piano, which her mother had given her. She was also performing in bars in Arizona by the time she was in her late teens. She sang, and everyone paused to listen. That unique talent would become one of her emblems. At the time, she was still figuring out how to fit in with a society that didn't always embrace people like her. At the age of 18, she wed the well-known guitarist Duane Eddy. He was among the most well-known figures in musical rock and roll at the time. Eddy was more established, older, and heavily active in the music industry. For a time, it seemed like a good fit. They had a daughter together after getting married. Miriam experienced the national music industry for the first time while traveling with him. Behind the scenes, however, things weren't quite so tranquil. Despite the fact that Eddy's light remained brilliant, Miriam frequently felt like a silent shadow. Despite her intelligence, energy, and original ideas, she didn't seem to be cut out for the business world or even marriage. Like many marriages that begin too young and under unfavorable circumstances, that one started to fail. By 1968, Miriam and Duane Eddy had divorced, leaving her a single mother who felt more and more alone as an artist. More significantly, the split forced her to confront a more significant issue that had been nagging at her for a while. What sort of individual was she? Was she only a preacher's daughter who wed a celebrity? If not, could she have achieved stardom on her own? Miriam made a significant choice at this juncture of uncertainty, when she felt uncertain about her identity and potential. She gave up her given name and adopted Jessi Colter. The name was significant in and of itself. For Jessi, it worked better. This was more modern and free, but Miriam was tougher. Coulter was renowned, powerful, and Western in terms of sound. Alongside well-known names, it was the type of name that could stand alone. It was the type of name you might see at the top of a tour or on a record. A new beginning in both life and art arrived with that new name. Jessi Coulter began to establish herself in the music industry. She made no effort to conform to the stereotype that others had created of her. The highly polished Nashville country music of the era was not what she wanted to sound like. The rougher, more radical aspect of country music, which was still finding its voice, piqued her interest more. The term outlaw country was used to describe this trend. For her, it couldn't have been better. Country music was undergoing significant transition and upheaval in the early 1970s. In order to create, record, and perform according to their own terms, musicians such as Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson were departing from the Nashville machine. Jessi Colter was a perfect fit for this new culture because of her spiritual depth, bluesy edge, and honest lyrics. The only woman in the group of many men around her was her. However, she showed little desire in playing the role of heroine. She had her own opinions, and her songs quickly became popular proof of them. Although it wasn't a huge hit in the music industry, one of her earliest solo albums, I Ain't the One, released in 1970 on LHI Recordings, was a positive first step. Nevertheless, it was sufficient to attract the interest of musicians who appreciated authentic music, and it prepared her for her future breakthrough. She also wrote really intimate songs. They were founded on her faith, her loneliness, her questions, and her anguish. The timing of Jessi's entry into the rebel country scene wasn't coincidental. It was also about getting along and having trust. That relationship deepened when she met Waylon Jennings, who was not just one of the most well-known figures in the genre but also spotted something special in Jessi's work right away. They connected emotionally and artistically right away. The next phase of Jessi Coulter's life would be shaped not only by her music but also by her challenging and enduring marriage to Waylon Jennings. However, Jessi had to struggle for her own room on her own before any of that could take place. Her life would be drastically altered by her improbable romance with Waylon Jennings, both personally and professionally. Even when her music began to take shape and her notoriety increased, this remained true. Their connection, which began with music, swiftly evolved into a difficult but transformative marriage that would challenge all of her preconceived notions about loyalty, love, and survival. The marriage that changed her life. It was more than just their shared love of country music that brought Waylon Jennings and Jessi Coulter together. She entered a fierce breeze. Their strong regard for one another's work served as the foundation for their immediate, nearly electric bond. Before they fell in love with Waylon, it seemed as though he had lived many lives. He was renowned for having one of the most rebellious sounds in country music and has experienced the highs and lows of fame. However, he was also plagued by persistent personal demons. Jessi, on the other hand, had recently emerged from the silent identity crisis that followed her split from Dwayne Eddy. She was now determined to pursue a career as a singer. They were both powerful and vulnerable, strong and weak. However, their marriage did not work out. Together, they made the decision to weather the storm. Their marriage took place in 1969. For the following 30 years, they would experience intense love, collaborate creatively, endure mental stress, and occasionally barely make it through the turmoil of their relationship. At its core, their relationship was one of loyalty. Because they were both attempting to save one another from their own misery, there was also a great deal of codependency between the two individuals. Waylon Jennings was already famous for challenging Nashville's rigid regulations. He appeared to be defiant, but in reality, he was suffering greatly. As his notoriety increased, his drug use increased as well. His actions were becoming worse by the 1970s. Waylon's story was one of many that claimed he was spending up to $1,000 a day on narcotics. That was not merely a startling figure. It was risky and couldn't last. His issue was causing him to lose money, feel awful, and get sick. Jessi Coulter did not do nothing during this period. She wasn't the background silent wife. She was totally present, navigating the turmoil and attempting to maintain her marriage while remaining complete. Jessi has stated in comments over the years that she had to put up with Waylon's chaos in order to love him. However, on several nights he refused to return home, and they feared that his heart might cease beating. They also made an effort to protect their family from the negative consequences of his way of life. She stayed because she believed in him as a person and an artist, not because she had to or because she was stupid. Jessi has frequently discussed how her Christian background influenced her approach to Waylon's issues. Although her faith was always strong, it was never ostentatious. When everything else was falling apart, it was, in many ways, what held their lives together. Waylon's decision to address his drug use in the early 1980s marked a sea change. He made the decision to stop abruptly, without consulting a physician or going to rehab. He didn't want outside assistance either. He took the difficult decision to get clean on his own terms while he and Jessi were in the Arizona desert. It was not an easy task. It was among the most agonizing things Jessi had ever witnessed. Every bone in his body, she claimed, seemed to be screaming in agony. For several days, she remained by his side, observing him as he managed his emotional and physical suffering. There were no safety nets, no medications, and no doctors. Waylon and Jessi were alone in the desert, dealing with every enemy they had ever encountered. Ultimately, Jessi claimed that her modest presence and unceasing prayers were what got him through those difficult days. And he survived in spite of all the opportunities. Waylon Jennings never used drugs again after that. It was not a complete rehabilitation because there were still mental scars, health issues, and the lingering impacts of a difficult life. However, that was the turning point. During his worst moments, Jessi supported him and helped him regain his composure. The difference was largely due to her courage and unwavering faith in him. Although their love story was turbulent and challenging, it was founded on something far more profound than their musical compatibility or public appearance. They didn't flee despite seeing the worst in one another. They had a strong musical bond that lasted a lifetime, bought a house, raised a son, and battled and were hurt. Waylon slowed down and concentrated more on his family and a few chosen projects throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Meanwhile, Jessi carried on with her own small but significant task. She had established herself as one of the few female outlaw country musicians with a distinctive voice, sense of style, and enduring legacy, even though she wasn't constantly on the charts. She remained a rock for Waylon, their kid, and the close circle of friends and co-workers they trusted, despite the fact that she was less outgoing. Jessi, however, prioritized her family and faith. Waylon, on the other hand, was unable to escape the difficulties and attention that seemed to follow him wherever. Jessi was frequently caught in the thick of his battle with the establishment, which generated headlines. He experienced commercial disputes and legal issues. What a challenging existence Waylon Jennings led. Waylon Jennings was never concerned about neatness or morality. Nashville tried to create a star-shaped box for its stars, but he didn't fit in. Nor did he wish to abide by the regulations. Some found him admirable, while others found him aggravating since he was honest in his disobedience and stubborn. Whether it was due to his lifestyle or the expectations of the music industry, Waylon's life was filled with arguments, near misses, and incidents that continue to spark controversy. He was a risk-taker. On his own terms, sometimes creatively, sometimes appropriately. One of the most well-known and extensively covered incidents in Waylon Jennings' life occurred in August 1977 when he was arrested for cocaine use. His career nearly ended with this arrest. When federal authorities with a warrant stormed into Jennings' Nashville recording studio at the time, they claimed that a package containing a controlled substance had been shipped to him. According to several reports and court documents, the shipment was traced to a Los Angeles dealer before being intercepted en route to Jennings' studio. Alarms were immediately raised by the official charges of conspiracy and possession with intent to disseminate. The topic of discussion was not limited to personal use. According to the law, it was far more significant than that. However, Waylon didn't panic. His remark did, in fact, demonstrate his intelligence and slyness even in the face of adversity. Jennings noticed an error on the search order when the police showed it to him. According to him, the article mentioned the incorrect studio owner. He questioned the warrant's legitimacy based on that minor point, which halted the search long enough for the evidence to be discreetly discarded. By the time the cops finished the paperwork, the parcel was disappeared. Due to insufficient evidence, the charges were dropped. Ultimately, Waylon was not found guilty and the matter was dropped. However, the incident altered him in both personal and legal ways. He nearly lost, and his career might have ended if circumstances had been different. Instead of fleeing, Waylon did what he always did best. For him, the incident turned into a song. In his 1978 song Don't You Think This Outlaw Bit's Done Got Out of Hand, he was quite candid about that period. In the lyrics, he acknowledged that he was losing control of the criminal persona he had developed as it grew increasingly independent. The song was straightforward, unvarnished, and honest. It demonstrated that the man behind the celebrity was growing increasingly conscious of the expenses associated with his way of living. Waylon made no effort to conceal the extent of his drug use during this period in subsequent interviews. At one point, he claimed to be honest and acknowledged that he used more illegal substances than anyone else he knew. Although that was a startling admission, it also demonstrated his candor about even the most difficult aspects of his life. It was honest in a way that suggested they would feel guilty about what they said, but it wasn't boasting. The 1977 bust was more than just a significant event for Jessi Colter. My worst worry was that, as his wife and someone who had been there for him for years, she formed a strong bond with him. A lot of stress and unwarranted attention resulted from the arrest. However, Jessi stayed this time as well. She supported him and assisted him along, as she had done countless times before. In 1985, Waylon Jennings made headlines once more. However, this time the issue was not using drugs or running afoul of the law. It took place at a Los Angeles recording studio during the well-known recording session for the international charity single, We Are the World, which was created to help alleviate the famine in Africa. The song included a number of well-known musicians, including Bruce Springsteen, Ray Charles, Lionel Richie, and Michael Jackson. Waylon was initially prepared to perform when he was invited to represent country music. However, he disagreed with a creative decision made during the session. To acknowledge the African origins of the humanitarian issue the song was attempting to draw attention to, a Swahili line was proposed for the chorus. No good old boy sings in Swahili, Waylon reportedly told the producers before quietly leaving the studio. The occasion created a stir. Some accused him of being culturally insensitive, while others claimed he was simply being himself and didn't feel comfortable singing in a language he didn't understand. Waylon later downplayed the incident, claiming that it was a personal decision rather than a cultural or political statement. He claimed that he didn't feel included and that he didn't like the way the meeting was going. To be fair, people's complex perception of him was further layered by the exit. It gave his detractors the impression that Waylon was even less willing to compromise. His friends interpreted it as yet another example of his extreme individualism, demonstrating that he was a man who would never fit in.